Welcome to the Re-Entry Archive. Retreat into the darkness. A lysergic acid diethylamide experience report taken from erowid.org. I wasn't expecting to take LSD. We'd planned for perhaps the week after, but my housemate had suggested it at some point in the afternoon, and I had agreed. The first hour was fairly normal. There wasn't a noticeable difference at first. The visuals were predominantly wavy and light, but it quickly began to get more intense. Approaching the peak, the visuals were extremely intense. We turned on the star projector, and everything flattened. The LEDs are slightly displaced from each other, so that different colours move over each other. This was multiplied tenfold by the acid. It felt as though the colours were moving over my retinas. Soon, all depth perception went. It became incredibly difficult to see anything beyond the stars from the projector. I could just about make my roommate out, though his face was heavily distorted and almost unrecognisable. The space between the stars was completely dominated by fractal patterns. Looking around was quite bizarre. It felt like the world was being presented to me as if I was watching TV. Everything was completely two-dimensional and amorphous. Lifting things up felt very precarious. Trying to pick out individual objects was near impossible. I lay down and crossed my eyes. I could see everything at once. It was as if my ability to watch objects from my peripheral had been enhanced. Suddenly, I didn't need to focus on things to see them. I went outside, and all of reality felt entirely linear. I felt entwined with it. I no longer walked on the surface of the earth. The earth was completely undefined. Nothing had boundaries. Everything was one. Time, space, and consciousness were inseparable. It felt like a sheet passing through my head, each infinitesimal section of which represented a single point in space and time. I could move in any direction through the sheet, and everything had an order. Like an ant sees blades of grass in rows with gaps between, the points in space-time were neatly ordered. Taking any path produced a coherent, linear reality. I found that I could look straight up and nothing blocked my view. I knew that I was looking at the edge of the universe. Directly above there was nothing, although there were planets, stars, and galaxies, and distance between them. I could see straight past them, to the very beginning of time. As I looked up, the world around me was wrapped into a ball. The rooftops, which ordinarily appear in a straight line, wrapped around me and blended with the trees in between. It was a little like lying on the ground in a clearing of some woods. My perspective had changed. We took our shoes and socks off, and I felt something leave my body. It was almost as though a burden had been lifted. I tried to store that memory well, to remind me to do it again if I ever felt lost. After a while, we came back inside. Went up to my room and suddenly things felt off. I think it might have been the combination of coming inside, which felt relatively dark compared to the night sky, and the fact I'd recently spent a lot of time in my room. My roommate and I always sit opposite, but this time I felt like there was a wall between us. I could see him on the other side. He lived out the same reality as me, except his was full of light and life. Like ice extracts warmth from the hand, he extracted light from my trip. It wasn't his fault. He'd been given the opposite end. It was nobody's choice. The two extremes of the trip that had simply been torn apart. One belonged to me, and the other to him. I felt myself retreat into the darkness. I began to accept it, eventually greeting it like a friend. I allowed myself to slip away, and as I did, my roommate became more and more distant. Soon I became a vacuous shell. I still remember the moment I disappeared. Everything that I thought of as me ceased to exist. My personality, my memories, my wants and desires all vanished. The only thing left was a consciousness, and without the rest, nothing had a meaning. At this point, everything became completely internalized. I said goodbye and collapsed in on myself. Alone with my thoughts, I began to panic. It's the worst feeling on LSD. I know there's almost nothing I can do. I no longer felt comfortably numb. Instead, I'd become paranoid and scared. Desperately, I got up and went downstairs. Once downstairs, I began to realize that my entire perception of the world is based on a unique collection of thoughts and ideas and connections. My anxious approach to taking LSD is one in which I am constantly aware of and perpetually terrified by the prospect of a bad trip, and by the idea that I might send someone else into a bad trip. Although I'd always try to suppress it, there's that internal monologue that I can't control. The tiny thought in the back of my head over which I have no jurisdiction. I believed in that moment that I could sever that connection. I could willingly manipulate the neural pathways in my brain to completely remove the fear. By exiting my own psyche, I had the power to manipulate my inner self. After that, everything became significantly easier. Although I haven't been able to completely shake the memory of where I've been tonight, I've begun to enjoy the visuals, and my mindset is considerably more stable. I sat and listened to some music for a while, and thought about all sorts of things, none of which I can remember now. I rode out the tail of the trip, watching stuff on the projector. By 4 o'clock, I was ready to sleep. It wasn't hard as my closed-eye visuals had faded by this point. The sweeping patterns lulled me into a trance, and I drifted into dreamland. I can't remember the dreams I had, but I remember it didn't feel like dreaming. It wasn't that I felt awake, but I felt fully conscious. I could watch my dreams from above, seeing every element played out individually. I knew they were my dreams, but I enjoyed them nonetheless. You don't have to have lived through an experience to learn from it, so let's take a few moments to reflect upon what this journey might mean. The most notable moment during this experience is when a room is divided in two by the appearance of a wall. This perhaps is a manifestation of the psyche been split into its shadow and persona components. On one side of the symbolic wall is darkness and fear of an unintegrated shadow, and on the other is the lightness and life of a wholly integrated self. The themes of fear and worry and a desire to be in control are present throughout this experience. This is the archetype of the Tyrant King, a character who is defined by a pathological need for control. So desperate is his need to control reality that he builds ever larger walls to protect his kingdom. But reality cannot be controlled. Despite his best efforts, the uncertain and the unpredictable lay just beyond his grasp. Finding himself unable to achieve absolute control, or else unable to surrender to the chaos, the king binds himself up with the fear of the unknown until he can no longer act for fear of what might happen. When fully integrated, however, the Tyrant King becomes wise. He sees that his intentions were noble, but that his means were flawed and his reach finite. He frees himself from the paralyzing grasp of fear, and he directs effort into influencing only those things which are in his control, and he makes peace with those things which are not. When we let go of our own fear of the unknown and our desires to control the uncontrollable, our walls can come down and we can step into the light and life of the other side.